Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk titled Blood and Wires, How the Tech Industry Fails Humanity. Before we get started, I just want to make sure that everyone's aware. There is some content in here that's going to be a little bit gritty. So if you just don't have the mental bandwidth to listen to this, or you've had a day, it's been a lot, no harm, no foul if you choose not to stick around for it. But if you couldn't tell from the title of the presentation, we are going to be talking about the ways that humanity is impacted by the work that we do. So with that out of the way, I would like to pitch you all on a new startup idea, an idea that I think is going to make the world a better place. This idea has the potential to profoundly improve the lives of every person on this planet, but it can only be that way with your help. By the end of this talk, you will be so excited to invest in this idea, maybe not in money, but hopefully in some of your time and energy. This bold new idea, though, needs something to represent it, like something like a mascot, like something that's as big as the idea itself, something like an elephant. And if we're going to have an elephant, then we might as well give it a name. So like, why not? Let's just name it Topsy. So, hi, my name is Emily Croce. I've been involved in the field of information security for over a decade. I started my career with the U.S. intelligence agency, with U.S. intelligence agencies before leaving the U.S. government for jobs in the tech startup world. My current job is as an ICS pen tester, which means that I usually spend most of my professional time around heavy machinery and factories. But you didn't come to hear a talk about me. You came to hear a talk about elephants. So let's get back to Topsy. Topsy the elephant's story ends in 1903. But the story of Topsy's end begins, as so many tragic ends do, with a format war. In the 1880s, commercial electricity was coming to the United States, and the greatest minds in the world had been hard at work for generations trying to recapture Ben Franklin's lightning in a bottle. In this contest, two frontrunners emerged: direct current, that was championed by Thomas Edison, and alternating current, that was being championed by George Westinghouse and his partner Nikola Tesla. And what came to be known as the War of the Currents, both Edison and Westinghouse were vying to provide the means of electric generation and distribution to the public. Before this time, humans had been burning wood, oil lamps, and candles to light and heat our homes and cities, but burning things comes with some overhead. It's very dangerous, it's cumbersome. And it was common for misplaced flames to burn down entire major cities, as it did in Seattle in 1889, in Boston in 1872, or in Chicago in 1871. Both Westinghouse and Edison saw the potential value to humanity in this promise that electricity brought with it. They also saw the potential monetary value in that proposition. Edison's DC power had major drawbacks, though. It couldn't be delivered as efficiently as Tesla and Westinghouse's AC scheme, which would mean that remote areas of the United States would be a lot more difficult to power. DC was, therefore, ill-suited to the purpose of powering large areas. AC was clearly the better technology, and we know that even today. AC was what humanity needed, but as is so often, what humanity needs is not the only motivating factor in invention. Edison knew the business cost of losing this war, and he was determined not to come in second. So the question for Edison became, how do you win a format war that you're losing? In November of 1887, Edison received a letter from a man named Alfred Suffolk. Suffolk had a brilliant idea for electricity. It was so great. His idea was to use electricity as a humane method for prisoner execution. Suffolk had heard the story about some guy getting drunk and killing himself when he touched a live generator. So Suffolk, being a dentist and working mostly with patients that sat in a chair, he thought that an invention that used electricity to immediately kill a prisoner while seated in a chair actually sounded pretty great. So he penned a letter to Edison asking him the best way to electrocute humans. Publicly, Edison was opposed to the death penalty, and he agitated for the abolition of capital punishment. Edison told Safik that he didn't want himself or his invention to be associated in any way with killing humans, and so he told Safik to kick rocks, as we say. A month later, Safik sent Edison another pitch for the same idea. This time, Edison's answer was a little bit different. He suggested that Safik use Westinghouse's AC to do the job. It seems that in this 1 month period of time, Edison noticed a business opportunity right in front of him. If he could associate death by electricity with his competitor, he might yet have a way to win this war. So privately, Edison began funding the engineering and construction of the world's first electric chair to accomplish this goal. Thus, a new invention solely for the purpose of expediting the killing of humans efficiently was born from a technology designed for altruistic uses. And it was all being done in the name of business. Edison thought that if he could convince the public that AC electricity was synonymous with death, that he'd create just such a repulsive image for alternating current that the public would just never accept it. Edison figured that this actually translated for him directly into dollars and cents, and he wasn't totally wrong about that. In later years, the term Westinghouse became a popular way of saying that someone had just been executed in an electric chair somewhere. But Edison wasn't just a businessman, and he wasn't just an inventor, he was also a showman. He had a plan to drive home his point about the dangers of AC with the public, and what he had in mind was pretty gruesome. Starting the next year in 1888, Edison staged a series of public animal executions. He would go on ending the lives of stray animals with AC until about 2 years later, when Edison upped the ante. In 1890, a murderer named William Kemmler was placed in the chair that Edison had secretly helped build. He became the first man to die in an electric chair. The execution of William Kemmler was so horrific. I'm going to spare you the details, but suffice to say that it turned out that execution by electrocution was less efficient than Mr. Safik and Mr. Edison had predicted that it would be. It was so ineffective, in fact, that Westinghouse is later reported to have said they could have done a better job with an axe. Now, you might think that this failure constituted an abject failure for the entire idea of the electric chair wholesale, and that the idea of this being used as a humane tool for execution would be the end of the story. Well, the last inmate executed in the electric chair in the United States was in 2013, less than a decade ago. Some states, in fact, still haven't outlawed its use in execution. But Emily, what does this have to do with an elephant, not to mention one so specifically named? Don't worry, we're getting there. As Westinghouse won more and more contracts for AC power across North America, the War of the Currents slowly but surely came to an end around 1893. By 1900, the War of the Currents was more or less over, but in 1903, there would be one last animal execution. Topsy was a circus elephant. She killed 3 of her handlers, and for this, it was decided that she needed to be put to death. As a society, we've come to realize over the years that elephants are some of the most gentle and empathetic creatures on the planet. We know that they can lash out and hurt or kill people when they're mistreated, so we've since begun to treat them a little bit better than we used to. We recognize that an elephant's empathy kind of mirrors our own. This is especially important to remember when we take note of the fact that Topsy was physically abused her whole life. We see our own humanity reflected back at us in Topsy's reaction to lifelong abuse and torture. By the way, that last handler that she killed happened to be a drunk who fed her a lit cigarette. So it came to be that a decade after the War of the Currents ended, 2 of Edison's men were sent to assist in the public execution of Topsy the elephant with Westinghouse electricity in Luna Park, New York, in front of a crowd of locals. This execution had no way of turning the tide in favor of DC. Edison didn't stand to benefit from Topsy's execution, and yet the involvement of his company in the execution of Topsy stands as a brutal legacy of turn-of-the-century commercial competition. I bet when you all came, you didn't expect to hear a story about how an elephant, the treatment of an elephant reflects our own innate humanity. But what is humanity anyway? Is it people? Sure. But maybe that definition is a bit too vague. Maybe humanity means some other amalgamation of intangible traits that defines what it means to be human. Philosophers and science fiction authors have had us asking this question for thousands of years. As technology improves, we wonder what makes human intelligence unique in comparison to machine intelligence. If you're from the Descartes school of thought, I think, therefore I am is proof of your unique ability to apply self-reflective thought. According to Descartes, not just to think, but to exist at all. You see, humans, our ability to think rather than compute, is this inherent difference that we can identify about our own metacognition. Our human intelligence is able to compare both quantitatively in the same way that our computers can, but also qualitatively. That's something that our technology just isn't able to do yet. And while a computer's ability to enumerate and calculate things has far surpassed our own, objective thought is still beyond the grasp of our most complex machines. We can create a mode of music. We can compare our enjoyment of chocolate. We as humans have taste in art. We can have opinions about politics. We can feel things. And we also recognize that the value of helping, and we also recognize the value of helping other people who are in need. I don't claim to have the definition to answer this, the complete 100% gospel truth on this, that maybe being able to empathize with and help another human is just a small part of what makes humans human. In the same way that we make these comparisons about our intelligence, maybe we should be contrasting our humanity with our technology. Personally, I think Confucius got it right when he said that benevolence is the characteristic element of humanity. Almost every technology dreamt into existence comes with a promise to improve the human condition. What the story of Topsy shows us is the great and terrible potential of our own invention when it's paired with selfish interests. When this happens, a conflict of interest becomes inevitable. Innovation at its most noble is inspiring. It offers us a vision for a brighter future. It offers us less human toil, but there's this other side of innovation, the business side, that often works against the greater interest of humanity, and it's driven by self-interest. In this paradigm, decisions are made that benefit the bottom line rather than what's best for the people the technology impacts. These two concepts aren't always at odds with each other, but more often than not, if there's a conflict between these two, then the profit motive wins. With respect to the story about Topsy, we could fairly wonder if electricity for Edison was ultimately for the sake of humanity or for the sake of the dollar. You see, there's an invisible balance between these two conventions that needs to be maintained for a project to be both financially viable and ethical in our modern age. Not enough money and you risk not being able to pay for your project or even for your own survival. Not enough ethics and you risk unleashing a technology into the world that tears the fabric of our society, especially when it's in the wrong hands. This balance between humanitarian interest and profit is maintained primarily between three groups: the dreamers, the investors, and the scientists. One provides the idea or the vision, one provides the money, and the last provides the labor. The dreamers are the entrepreneurs. They have this idea and it's great and it's going to change the world, and they're working to bring that idea to fruition. They're responsible for building the business and directing the development of the idea. They're the boss. Some of you watching may be members of this group. Your job is to balance the interest of your ideas with the interest of the second group, the investors. I do not envy you. The investor's interest is in generating profit in the form of monetary gains from the dreamer's idea. The dream may excite them, and its implications for humanity may be kind of like a positive, maybe a feel-good incentive, but wealth is really the ultimate goal. Their responsibility is primarily focused on the financial viability of the project, of the dream. But these two groups can't make the dream reality alone. They need a third group. They need the scientists. Like myself, many of you in the audience probably fall into that last group. I work as part of a team with other scientists to bring a dream to life. In part, I have to adopt the dream of the company and make it my own, because most people like to believe in what they do at work. And so if I don't believe in my dream, if I don't believe in the dream of the company, there's probably a good chance that I'm not helping make it a reality. So the motivation of the scientist is perhaps the most complex of these three groups. Money is obviously a strong motivator for the scientists, but it may not be the only motivator. So often we do our own calculation on that balance between the work that we believe in and how much it pays to do it. We may take benefits into account when we take a job, how much money it's going to put into my retirement account, what's the base pay, are there stock options involved, etc. We as scientists become a microcosm of the overall balance in ethics versus profit. Companies know this, and they aim to sell their positions to us through a pitch or an open job offer that involves good pay, good benefits, but also an important mission. The success of any given technology depends on the individual decision-making of the dreamers and the investors, and the collective decision-making of the scientists to participate in building the dream. This is the Silicon Valley Agreement. These three groups then represent the members of a fast-paced culture that's kind of sprung up around Silicon Valley and the development of new technology. It's easy for ethical technology to get lost in a culture that thrives on this model of build fast and fail fast and rewards cutting costs and money. When it comes to investing time and energy back into a product, though, sometimes the dream gets cut short. In this rapid fire world, society ends up getting the short end of the stick. When it comes to the ways that the tech industry impacts humanity today, it's not only about the way that we as a society use technology, but also the way our habits and quirks find their way into the technology that we build. For example, we've known about usability issues around handedness for decades. In the Middle Ages, left-handed people were thought of as evil. We called them sinister, and we treated them with skepticism. Eventually, we came to realize that life for lefties is just harder in a right-handed world. And so adaptive technologies were built to accommodate this underserved class of people. This is why we have left-handed scissors. Makes sense, right? Recognizing this usability bias against lefties led to the creation of a whole suite of products designed to make life easier for this one particular class of people. That's one of the small ways that we've adapted technology to meet humanity's needs, without putting too much emphasis on the financial viability of the idea. The problem was solved, and the solution has since become a facet of our culture. But what about biases that have a deeper, more long-term impact on the quality of life for other classes of people? What about some biases that people have against different races, genders, sexualities, economic classes? In the early 1980s, vehicle statistics began to show a concerning trend. While the data showed that men drove more miles than women on average, and therefore died at a higher rate in collisions, women were 17% more likely to be killed in an accident while sitting in the front seat than a man at the same age. Similarly, any seatbelt wearing female occupant had a 73% greater chance of being seriously injured in a frontal car crash than a man in the same kind of accident. So why the statistical variance? It turns out that life-saving technical mitigations built into cars that protect vehicle occupants were not built or tested for women's smaller on average bodies. This was due to the fact that the auto industry only used crash test dummies that matched an adult male. When the data began reflecting these alarming statistics, regulators started to ask for crash test dummies to be made to spec for an average adult female. It would take another 20 years for a crash test dummy to be built, reflecting a smaller human body. Seemingly small oversights like this are one way that tech development and the industry around it failed humans. But not all oversights are so innocent in nature. Right now, there are technologies being pitched and sold that claim that they're going to revolutionize the way that we police our communities. They claim to do this through predicting who will commit crime and where. They do this through the use of a myriad of indispensable data and live sensors. The philosophy, of course, is that it's harder to commit a crime when you know you're being watched. Over the past decade, US municipalities have been taking a great deal of interest in these magical solutions to crime. So why is this kind of tech so bad then? If it can predict where crime is going to happen, why wouldn't you want to use that knowledge to allocate police resources accordingly? The devil's in the details. These technologies take in broad regional criminal statistics and analyze it to help local governments make conclusions. On its face, these technologies have a lot of potential monetary value to their investors. But who's really paying for it? Here again is where our balance of money and humanity is thrown into stark contrast. Data analysis is going to tell us where crimes are happening, but if we don't ask why the crime is happening here, we are willfully ignoring the human half of the problem. What these machine learning technologies don't consider is the qualitative reasons behind crime, the things that cause the crime in the first place. These types of technologies don't expose the critical context of why the crime might be high in one neighborhood and low in another. All that matters is the conclusion. They say that past is prologue, and nowhere is that more true than when you consider the effects of endemic discrimination designed and enforced by our own government and economic system to keep certain communities trapped in a perpetual state of economic depression. In the 1930s, the Federal Home Loan Bank Board, the FHLBB, commissioned a company called the Homeowners Loan Corporation, HOLC, to draw up a map showing the security of financial investments made in certain neighborhoods in certain cities around the United States. On the left, you can see one such map that the HOLC created. This one is for the city of Baltimore. This map was then used to allocate real estate investment from both private and public sources, but there's only one small problem. This map was created based exclusively on racial demographics. The HOLC then gave a rating to each neighborhood, A1 being the safest neighborhood to invest in, or the whitest neighborhoods in the city, all the way down to D9, which reflected the most insecure neighbors, or the neighborhoods with the highest density of non-whites. For decades, this map then dictated which communities got financial investments and which didn't. This is the first step of abstracting important social factors into the fuzzier concept of a neighborhood. On the right, you can see these neighborhoods mapped to a social vulnerability index, where 0, green, is less vulnerable and 1, red, is more vulnerable. Unsurprisingly, most of the same neighborhoods that were being invested in the 1930s rate lower on the social vulnerability index today. This historic practice of limiting investment to a certain group of people based on where they lived became part of what's referred to as redlining. If you'd like to know more, here's a link that will take you to the interactive map that you just saw in the last slide. It should help you digest the data a little bit more. Practices like redlining and Jim Crow laws are etched into public policy, while the market adopted strategies like racial steering and price discrimination. All of this was done for the purpose of financial advantage based entirely on skin color. These policies shaped neighborhoods. They created so-called sundown towns, or all-white municipalities that insulated communities by race and forced out non-whites. HOLC's investment security map all but ensured that far fewer economic advantages would be offered to one particular group of people. With this history in mind, is it any wonder really why crime statistics might reflect higher in certain places and among certain groups? Time abstracts this history and it recontextualizes it in our current day and age. Our technology now seems to abstract that history even further. When the dreamers and the investors come with their ideas of a better tomorrow, they often don't come with food printers and flying cars. They're coming with pre-crime, facial recognition, robocops, and surveillance drones. Future generations are going to blame a technology for these injustices instead of the people who created it, instead of the original perpetrators of the injustices in the first place. The good news is that in response to activist warnings, some communities are now moving to preemptively ban some of these technologies from public use before they can be fully adopted. But that hasn't stopped the companies from building the technology and taking it to market anyway. When we advocate for technology that isn't capable of considering the years of governmental neglect and abuse that lead an area to be economically depressed and prone to crime for generations, we have to ask ourselves again, who benefits? Is this for the betterment of mankind or for the dollar? This legacy of corrupt technological development necessitates that we have to do something about it today to respond to the damage that this cycle has on humanity. We are at a critical moment in history. We are training the first generation of machines whose processing is going to be used to replace our own decision-making on social issues. The choices that we make today will have impacts for generations to come. So how do we make technology more ethical then? One question that we could be asking of our technology is this giving more to humanity than it's taking? Not every idea is worth the investor's dollar. Similarly, not every idea is worth a scientist's labor hour. If you're a scientist like me, you can ask yourself, is the project that you're working on a benefit to society? Do you feel good about the idea? And is the end result of your work something that you'd be proud to associate your name with? I know that I've had my fair share of jobs where I wasn't sure that the answer to those questions were yes. I was lucky enough to also be able to disassociate myself from those prospects before they got too bad and I was not comfortable with them. Our economic system then incentivizes us to care less about the job and more about the money that the job pays. It encourages us to hold our noses and do work that we might object to if money is not part of the equation. One of my favorite technological visionaries, sci-fi author Philip K. Dick, said this: the true measure of a man is not his intelligence or how high he rises in this freak establishment. No, the true measure of a man is this: how quickly he can respond to the needs of others and how much of himself he can give. We need to get away from this idea that chasing paper is this one and only true virtue that exists. The amount of dollars one has does not on its own approximate intelligence, and it also doesn't prove the strength of one's character. In American culture, we often look at the richest people and aspire to have their level of wealth. We equate their wealth with their intelligence, and we see ourselves using our own smarts to attain that same level of wealth. We think if we could just work hard enough, we'd have just as much money as they do. We'd be just as righteous as they are. We'd be just as good as they are. But there's a side effect to this thinking as well. By that same logic that says that we can simply will our way out of our current financial station in life, we wonder why others don't just choose to do the same. We cast blame on those with less than us for not having pulled themselves up by their own bootstraps. Ultimately, we decide that if they're poor, it's more or less because they choose to be poor. It seems that same blind corner that exists in technology development also exists in our own inherent perception of human value itself. We need to disentangle our flawed perception of human value from the number on a bank statement. In this way, we can begin to see how our own choices impact others. We can start to build technologies that serve mankind instead of an economic system that encourages us to devalue our human worth. If we want to see change in the technology that we produce, we have to reassess the system of values that we use as a basis for these technologies. If you're a dreamer with an idea for technology, start thinking about the ways that your technology helps people that may never interact directly with it. Start thinking about the positive and negative ways that that technology will impact those same people, the people who may never touch it. Decide on a guiding principle and resolve to never make a compromise that might hurt society instead of help it. If the technology that you're working on already exists, then there's never a bad time to start thinking more ethically. But also think about the cultures that you build. Try to empower your workers and free them as much as possible. Give them opportunities to speak openly and don't punish them for being honest with you. Trust their judgment and listen to their concerns. Don't just listen, but take them to heart. Often the scientists have a deeper familiarity with those blind ethical corners that I was talking about than even the dreamers do. How the dreamers react to the scientists' feedback makes all the difference in the world. Both dreamers and investors can and should regularly consult with ethics lawyers who can help guide the conversation about the right way forward with investment and development. If the end goal really is to make the world a better place, then your actions should reflect that ethos. The good news is that we are not yet condemned to a future in a high-tech hellscape where blood runs through the wires of our machines instead of electrons. We can always atone our technological sins and make something that gives to humanity instead of takes away. In 1945, Dr. Robert Oppenheimer stood on a parcel of land called the Jornada del Muerto, or the Route of the Dead Man, who watched the single largest man-made explosion in history. The Trinity test made way for one of the most deadly technologies that humanity ever created. When we think of weapons of mass destruction, most people think of this bomb. The explosion was so violent that it caused him in that moment to recall a famous passage from a story called the Bhagavad Gita. And he had to reflect on how this quote now applied to himself. But a little over 60 years after the end of the War of the Currents, another milestone in electricity would be reached. On December 20th, 1951, EBR-1, the world's first nuclear power reactor, was switched on. At first, it only powered 4 light bulbs, and then it powered the entire facility. Technology has always been emblematic of change, and change is often perilous. We control our technology. We determine the course of our own history. We control the balance of the technology that we produce, and we increasingly are using those technologies to observe, analyze, and control the world around us. We are hopelessly intertwined with our own technology, whether it's a nuclear plant or one of our prehistoric ancestors using a tool for the first time. Our technology is definitive of our human existence on this planet. It's up to us to make our technologies work in our own best interest, not just for the survival of ourselves, but for the survival of the species. And so in closing, I'd like to refer to the words of another great contributor to atomic science. You cannot hope to build a better world without improving the individuals. To that end, each of us must work for his own improvement and at the same time share general responsibility for all humanity. Thank you.
I cannot think of a better way to end the day. That was absolutely wonderful. The history, the cadence, it was really excellent.
Okay, I was worried I sounded too much like I was reading from a paper, because I was.
No, it was very it was an excellent tone, I think, especially as the keynote.
Appreciate
and it
that.
was just
Thank you.
really interesting. Really well said.
Good. Thanks for the positive feedback.
Yeah, Perry, you had commented earlier, that's where I was trying to tease, where you had said somebody had noted that it seems like there was a theme to this conference. And there was. That was me who made that comment.
Yeah.
So as the organizer and the head of the CFP committee, one of the things I really wanted to push that would be a little different this time was, while there was certainly a lot of tech, there was a constant theme throughout most of the presentations, and particularly with the opening keynotes all the way to the closing keynote, about humanity. And I think that's something that we all too forget. A phrase that I often say is that we have too many nerd solutions for nerd problems. At the end of the day, users are people. People behind those computers are people. And what I liked about what Emily did is we took the compassion that was seen in multiple talks from that initial keynote, we took it to more of a systemic level of looking at it on this macro scale of what is our role in that level with humanity and industry and systems. So I thought that was incredibly well done, very poignant, very insightful.
Thank you. I'm glad my hard work paid off. It was a late night last night. Was there any feedback in the chat? Or that's on Discord now. I should probably
there
check.
was a lot in chat. So in Discord, there's a ton on chat right now. You're getting a bunch of kudos.
Okay, great.
People are sad about the elephant. Poor top.
I know. It's sad. It's such a sad story. When I was like up really late last night, and my body hasn't adjusted to the time difference, so I was like, "Topsy," like 11 o'clock last night.
Sad. I mean, it's sort of, I guess one of the questions I had in my head as I was listening to your presentation was, do you have specific technologies that you feel have just crossed all of your lines? Like, are you like, Bitcoin or some like NFTs or whatever it is?
Yeah, no, I could definitely go on the warpath. The problem is that like a lot of these companies are also really litigious. So I don't want to like call out anyone by name because their business model is kind of in that sellout of the human spirit. And if you say that overtly, then they like tend not to like that. So I think that everyone, this is the great thing about a talk like this, is like I don't feel like I have to say any of those names out loud because everybody has a sense for who those people are, right? Like it's not as if people take a job at a specific company and then they're like, oh well, this is great, like I feel great about this job, and it's definitely satisfying this need that I have to be productive and help people. Like everyone wants to help people, but from the outside looking in, I think a lot of people get that sense about some companies, like it's just not, that's not what they're doing there.
Do you feel like there's counterexamples to that, where there's companies you feel really are making a difference for humanity that you've noticed?
Yeah, well, most of those companies and the technologies that they build tend to be things that are done in retrospect. Like Google had some issues recently in the last few years where they were training a machine learning algorithm to like identify faces, and it ended up being that the algorithms were trained to identify like an African American's face as a gorilla, and this was like not a great thing. It's a really bad thing. So they ended up just like nuking the entire training algorithm that they were using. So like there are ways to make good choices about these technologies. But the problem that I see is that it happens in retrospect way too much. It's always like a second thought. Like they open the Pandora's box and then they realize like, oh shit, like we just did something that we had no intention of doing, and now we got to like put that genie back in the bottle. It's not a great way to mitigate those problems.
Need more genie bottles.
Yeah.
In the same way that security is often applied as a band-aid rather than as something built in from the start.
Yeah, there's a lot of rhymes in InfoSec in this talk I just gave, so I hope that people picked up on those.
Cool. I did not know, Bryson, if you wanted to do a full-on announcement of the different meets that are happening? Because
Yeah.
we talked about it
Yeah,
earlier, but
so-
some people might not have heard it.
Yeah, so Emily, again, thank you so much. I know when we first started talking about this a while ago, you were a little nervous, and it was definitely a hard topic, right? The reality is we're not going to just throw a few more lines of code and solve these problems. We really need to acknowledge some of the darkness that's there, and I think that was absolutely appropriate. So I appreciate you being so brave to do that.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity. It was a challenge.
Okay, so Emily's going to be over on Discord for those of you who would like to talk to her in person. What?
Well, that's where the Discord is. It's right there. It's right down there. That's where you can see the
Oh, I have to post. I have to
Just
paste the
watch
Discord.
my YouTube videos.
thing.
Comment below.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to the Discord. Thanks, everyone.
Here, posting the Discord link in. There you go. Discord link for those of you who haven't seen it at this point. Thank you to Dave and Perry for staying with me all day and making me look smart. Second, thank you to all of the coaches, the speakers, and the volunteers, and all of the GRIM staff that helped make this possible. This is the fourth one that we did. We started this back at the beginning of the pandemic when everything just stopped. I mean, there were no conferences, everybody just killed everything, and we were like, well, we should leap into that. And I feel like we've found a way to bring a different voice by really trying to bring so many different voices in a different tone. The next one will be in July. So we're continuing to try to put these in the dead spots in the calendar so that there's always content here for you being generated. And of course, if you can't make it during the day, we will record everything and put it up on the GRIM YouTube for you. It usually takes a few weeks after a conference, so be patient with us. We have happy hours starting here. Take your time. They're not going to start right at 6:30. Everybody will just sort of work their way in and they'll begin. I am leading the Blue Team Choose Your Own Adventure. It's a custom adventure that I wrote on an incident management process. We have Mark Griffin hosting on fuzzing. So for those of you who want to talk about symbolic execution. And then we have Dave Mayer talking about red teaming and penetration testing. Dave leads the red team practice over at GRIM. And with that, Dave, Perry, any last words that you'd like to add?
No, I would just like to say thank you so much to the speakers, to Bryson, to the mentors, to Laura et al. Who helped organize this. Dave and I just showed up every 45 minutes and gave, pithy statements. So really, you all did all the work. So.
Yeah, much appreciated you guys having us. Hopefully our jokes were good, and we hope to see you soon in the excitement that is the meets and in real life.
Yeah, I think it's Lauren, Christina, and Anna. So thank you so much.
And with that, conference officially over.
Clap, claps.
Bye.
Thank y'all.